In this brief overview of neoclassical economic thinking, I wanted to highlight a critique by one of its finest members, Kenneth Arrow. Arrow describes two main challenges to neoclassical economics. He notes that it is extremely difficult to model ignorance of economic agents and that most models are silent on how markets reach their equilibria. In describing the merits of market capitalism, Arrow describes, we tend to regard it as a virtue of the system that the individual agent need not know very much. Indeed, the apparent modesty of the information needed is one of the most appealing aspects of the neoclassical model, both in the descriptive sense that the individual's decision problems appear manageable for him and for the economist studying him, and in the normative sense that the system permits its members to spend their time and effort at producing goods rather than in unnecessary duplication of information. I wonder whether this modesty of the information needed is still as attractive in the Anthropocene, where negative impacts are often miles away from the place of purchase. Most people have no clue how many carbon emissions are embodied in the products they buy or how to save on these emissions by buying alternatives. One could argue that taxes will introduce such signals by raising prices for products that use many fossil fuels. But often such taxes can have unwanted distributional consequences. For example, a tax on energy use will be regressive when low-income households spend more of their income on energy bills. Jackson, Contained and Boyd et al. Proposes to present tax reforms in package deals, where negative distributional outcomes can be compensated by other measures. While this may be necessary to facilitate political acceptability, at some point, the numerous possible Pigouvian taxes will present a trade-off between efficiency, acceptability, and complexity. As a final warning to try and solve everything with taxes, a tax could be considered a price and possibly alter social norms, much like Gnizzi and Rusticini's A Fine is a Price, where the introduction of fines in a daycare led to an increased number of late pickups by parents. The much criticized Homo economicus, who is both selfish and rational, seems like a natural point of departure for anonymous market interactions. Naturally, the market does not turn everyone into calculating egoists, yet there is evidence that market interactions make us more selfish. A finding that is, paradoxically enough, in contradiction with a typical neoclassical assumption that people have preferences over outcomes, but not over the procedures or forms of interaction that lead to these outcomes. To study whether market interactions influence morals, Falk and Czech investigated the willingness to pay to save a mouse from execution. Participants could choose between earning money from the experiment or spending it to prevent the execution of a lab mouse. The participants were informed that it concerned lab mice that were bred for a medical experiment but lacked the genetic attributes of interest for that study. The instruction included descriptions and a video on how the mice were executed and explained that saving the mouse means that it would spend its remaining 2 years in a protected environment with other mice. In the individual control, participants had the choice between earning €10 from the experiment or nothing but saving the mouse. In the bilateral market treatment, participants faced a double-sided auction where a seller and a buyer negotiated over an agreement how to split €20 for killing the mouse. The multilateral market treatment resembled this setup. Here, there were 7 buyers and 9 sellers negotiating over the €20 split. In both markets, the sellers and buyers can make multiple offers. The percentage of saved mice was significantly lower in the market interaction treatments. In the individual control group, half the participants was willing to have a mouse killed and earn €10 from the experiment, whereas in the market treatments, 75% of the participants was willing to do so for 10 euros or less. According to Falkenchek, the literature gives several possible explanations for this. First, in the market interactions, the responsibility is shared. Second, offers in the market interactions suggest some level of social acceptability. Third, the market framing could speak more strongly towards materialistic desires or competitive tendencies. The authors had expected a difference between the two market treatments due to replacement logics being stronger in the multilateral market. That is, if I don't buy the killing of this mouse for such a great deal, then I'm sure someone else will. Yet this difference did not occur. In summary, in this lecture, I have argued that neoclassical economics has yielded several insights that are important to the conservation of nature. Here, I have reviewed literature on the market failure that arises with externalities and then focused on the special case of this externality problem with the tragedy of the commons. I have illustrated how the tragedy of the commons can be recognized in monoculture farming, the environmental policies that are inspired by neoclassical insights, such as Pigouvian taxes and cap-and-trade markets, have shown promise in some settings. However, policymakers should be careful to focus only on these solutions, as community governance may be more sustainable in some cases. Finally, there may be drawbacks to Pigouvian taxes and cap-and-trade instruments. Carbon taxation is often referred to as carbon pricing, and when the tax is perceived as legitimizing the purchase, such monetary incentives may erode intrinsic motivation. Similarly, the solution of introducing a market mechanism to deal with environmental challenges may not be so innocent either. Next week, we look into the practice of determining such carbon taxes and some alternative policy instruments. We started this lecture with a map from Grasshopper Geography that depicts global river basins. The flows and ecosystem services that we derive from rivers can be considered open access goods, and one can imagine that commons management becomes increasingly difficult with the length of the river. The bottom map by Grill and colleagues shows that only a third of rivers longer than 1,000 kilometers remain free flowing over their entire length. The models that we looked into today abstracted from issues of time, of impact, or location of pollutants. Next lecture, we look into how Pigouvian taxation changes under circumstances where pollutants are stocks, as with climate change, or pollutants for which the location matters, as with nitrogen deposition. Here you can find more details about the references used in this lecture. Thank you for your attention. In case you like any of the videos, feel welcome to share or subscribe. Hope to see you back for the next lecture.